Hello, bonjour, Aanii, from Sault Ste. Marie to Sioux Lookout, from Manitoulin to Moose Factory. Welcome back to Connecting the North with Fringe North. My name is Garrett Ryan. I am the host of this program, and today we are joined by the amazing playwright, actor, theater facilitator, Chandel Gambles. Thanks so much for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here, Garrett. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. I introduced you as playwright, actor, theater facilitator. I know you have your hands in many different areas of the arts. So why don't you tell us in your own words a little bit about the work you do?
Oh gosh. Yes, it is someone of wearing many hats, as all those listeners out there will probably be able to relate. Working in the arts requires exploring so many different things, that opportunity to say yes. So the work that I very much enjoy doing is acting on stage in very physical theater oriented shows. But that doesn't mean that I haven't gone and worked abroad doing singing on stage on cruise ships, working as an arts administrator in all capacities all across Ontario, and working with puppets out in Nova Scotia, teaching in the Gaspésie. It's been a wild ride, and so just taking different opportunities as they come. Certainly working on scripts, easy to do in Northern Ontario, so I'm very much enjoying that right now. And yeah, there's so many different ways one can contribute to the arts. So
Yeah,
saying yes whenever they come up.
absolutely. I'm curious what you said about working on scripts in Northern Ontario. You said it was easy for you to be working on scripts in Northern Ontario. Do you want to expand on that? Like what kind of work are you doing in the North, playwright wise?
So right now I'm working on developing a one-woman mask theater show. And so physical theater that I enjoy doing usually part has many different players involved in the scene work. So when you're in a rural, remote community in Northern Ontario, you find there are fewer folks that you get to play with that might have that same artistic inclination as you do. So getting to explore the idea of a physical theater piece, one woman show. How do the masks move in the space? How does that movement influence the characters themselves? Because if you are playing a single character, then you're going to have an easy enough time going from one character to going one way through the script. If you're switching very solidly and saying 10 minutes is this character, and then this 10 minutes I play character afterwards, you don't need to um, consider the many transitions. But I'm having the great fun of working on a piece where the characters are switching throughout, and that has been a lot of fun, because here in Northern Ontario, I'm loving taking the advantage of the fact that I have more space to play in than I might if I lived in a very small space in Toronto, as I have done previously. So yes, having the opportunity to feel more connected to the environment, and also explore what type of materials are out there to use to create those masks that the natural surroundings inspire. But that's another project.
Yeah, absolutely. That is such an interesting perspective. I want to delve a little bit into that some more, but what we often talk about some of the challenges of working in Northern Ontario, and those challenges are typically issues of theatrical infrastructure and things of that nature. So it's really interesting to hear the perspective of these positives that come with the environment itself. But before I get deeper into that, just for some context, you talked a little bit about working in Ontario and Nova Scotia, and you said you were in Toronto briefly. What? Why don't you tell us the different places you worked as an artist, just to get an idea of how to contrast these different experiences?
Okay. So I was in Australia working on a cruise ship. So I feel I was very much around Australia and
Yeah.
hopping in and out. So that was taking a more musical side
Hmm.
of the project on the road. So that was an entertainment and gosh, I don't remember the title. So you jumped in, you got to do the entertainment side, and you also got to do the public relations side of things. So I got very good at smiling and dancing with folks. Um, and then in Ottawa, I was acting on stage in the park with Odyssey Theatre. That really boosted my interest in the physical theater realm, in the mask realm. So and they were my first equity contract. So they always hold a special space in my heart. And have continued to work with them actually during the pandemic. It's the pandemic has opened up a number of opportunities because of that exploration online of different art forms. And whether it's we did a podcast ourselves and did a radio recording of a theater piece that way and had folks from all across Canada working together. So it didn't matter where I was located. I
Hmm.
could do it from here and somebody else was reading in from BC. So that was
Yeah.
bad. Toronto, that was working with the Actors Fund of Canada. I'll just drop their name. They're now referred to as the AFC. Um, that was as an arts administrator. So you were taking in requests for funding from folks that were in very tight, difficult situations, unexpected situations. And I do know that they have funding left that the Heritage has given towards artists. And that runs out at the end of March. So I'm actually going to plug that right now. I was saying that if there are any artists out there that have been working in the arts that have lost funds over the past during the pandemic period, then you can apply for, I believe it's up to $2,500 from them, and it's a gift, right? So you don't need to worry about paying that back. But check that out, AFC. So they're great. And gosh, living in Nova Scotia, I was doing sort of a puppetry exploration with a fabulous group out there, Maritime Marionettes, and working in Gaspésie was of Quebec, right on the coast, beautiful area, and they've got a lovely artistic community there as well. That was as a teacher doing arts and culture and English second language teaching. So finding different ways and different opportunities to go to different spots because travel is important to me and exploring different cultures very inspiring to any art form, and saying if I can get in the door this way I can do these fun things over here. And so similarly, I did training in Paris at École Internationale de Théâtre Jacques Lecoq, which allowed me to explore theater in with many different cultures coming together, which is the whole point of that group, and being in a space that makes you see different art forms, contemplate what boxes you put yourself in for your own art, and figure out how it might be complemented by other different styles, different cultures, different movements. Yeah, thinking outside that box is I would encourage for anyone who's interested in seeing where their art lies.
Yeah, absolutely. That is that's all fantastic. That's going to be a lot to talk about in the kind of Northern Ontarian context. I'm so happy that you've had all these different and so varied experiences making art and working within the realms of art creation and arts education. That's fantastic. I want to add because I always like to jump on this. I'm so glad you mentioned the opportunities that have come up digitally, because that's really something we're trying to do here at Fringe North as well, as capitalize on that digital artistic realm that's opened up really during the pandemic. That's what's given us the opportunity to do this right now. It's such a for all the negative things that happened during the pandemic, I think this was a big positive. This new world of connection that's opened up between artists working all over the place, in our regional context in Northern Ontario, but also just all across Canada and the world. it's so great. So I'm glad you mentioned that because it is something that we've really found to be sort of a game changer for the way we're approaching arts creation and arts facilitation. So that's great. Um, so with all that being said, now that you've had that bit of reflection on the different places you've worked, what does it mean to you right now to be an artist working in Northern Ontario?
Right now, it's got a number of opportunities to work with the community is where I've put my focus. Not so much in creating necessarily my own work for showing in my community, but working with others to explore their art forms, or supporting different arts and culture groups that exist here that are bringing in artists or encouraging workshops. I have the pleasure to currently be funded to work on my own things in my basement, as it were, which is a great delight. Um, I do feel I do feel some of those isolation pressures that other people feel of saying, "There's no other theater people around me. What is this?" But it inspires one to look outside the box and say, can I be influenced by other players? How does music influence my art? Are there musicians out there that I can jam off of? Are there visual artists that inspire me? Um, and and being resourceful in that way of thinking whom else I might play with as a Northern Ontario artist and accepting the fact that I am in a rural remote location and that either feeding into what does that mean in space when I'm writing scripts, how does that influence the characters and the stories I'm telling, that all comes into play. Because if I want to write a script about living in downtown Paris, it doesn't feel right in this moment. Uh, but exploring different avenues, different um, reflections that I have when I'm here makes much more sense to me when I'm working on things, and it allows you to play off of the other spirits that are in your community. I've also in the community sense of things, I've been enjoying opportunities to be an artist in community, doing artist and community education. We've got an activity that's going to be happening with a local hospital, which I won't get into too much. We're in the beginning stages of that, but figuring out how other people get to play, because maybe I like to play, but who else out there wants to and doesn't have that opportunity? Working with Pied Piper Kid shows that I can give my artist knowledge of, saying these are the sorts of things that I would like to see come into the community that folks might not get to see around here. Or if I reflect on when I was a child in the area, what was exciting that I saw local artists doing, what was exciting that I didn't see that I want to have come in that really spoke to me and influenced me becoming an artist. Because we're I feel a greater sense of responsibility right now as a Northern artist of making sure that somebody else that's younger than me gets an opportunity to be inspired by all the art forms,
Mm-hmm.
and all the opportunities. And that requires stepping into those volunteer roles that make these things happen. Because yes, we don't necessarily have the infrastructure to of the buildings, we don't necessarily have the full-time paid roles that can support folks, but there are different ways that we can either volunteer or connect with internet across the land. That's been great to do over the pandemic while being in the north, and finding out who are those other community touch tone points that we can do collaboration with through technology, to bring workshops through, bring artists through, or jam one on one as artists and explore that. Um, there's a couple of great groups that I could talk about right now, but you might want to venture onto a different question there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy for you to plug anyone doing work in the region for sure. But yeah, I guess in that realm, then, what do you see the region as having what do we have to build towards to really create a strong environment for these new emerging artists? Like, what do you see as sort of an ideal uh, forward-looking place in the your specific local art scene, but then also regional northern arts? Like, what is the place we need to be working towards?
Well, I know there's a number of organizations that are moving to connect folks together, and I've had the pleasure of working with them as a northern artist. They helped pay my bills while I worked on my art, um, and fabulous community in order to make connections and network. Spark, supporting performing arts in rural and remote communities. They're located down in Halliburton area, but have board members from all across Ontario.
When I
And
when I was I just finished my grad degree
yeah,
in theater, and when I was doing that degree, I was an intern for Spark. So I'm
oh,
so happy you plugged Spark. They're a fantastic group of people. They're so amazing.
they are absolute sweethearts, and I had the opportunity to be their rural and remote networking and outreach person while I was living in the north. That was pre-pandemic when I was also living in Northern Ontario. And they continue to have these gatherings of like-minded folks saying, even though you are maybe in a remote community in Southern Ontario, you have a lot of similarities to the communities in Dryden and Temiskaming. And what are the ways that we can either connect and support each other in building infrastructures, digital infrastructures sharing, or connecting those folks together? Because one of those things is, if we cannot find you, if we don't know where you are, how can we help you? And that conversation inspired some work. I had the pleasure of being the artistic director for Living Temagami in Temagami. They got a grant. We created a project that inspires to have all the artists across Northern Ontario represented in a digital format online. So if anyone were to come and cross that gateway to the north and North Bay, that any artist, whether it's visual, dance, theater, can be found on that website. So they're trying to do that reach out to figure out who are all the cats and what are all the offerings. Because if we can't find each other, and I'd say that seems to be that feeling of isolation for emerging artists, that there's a feeling of nobody else is here. And who am I going to play with? And I have to go to Toronto to find someone to play with. And so we need to make sure that those networks, those people that we know, I know Garrett now, right? So how do I share my knowledge that I know Garrett with somebody else? There are huge pushes being made on a national level. Capico is leading some of that for the push for open data networking, and basically putting our information out in a way that allows people to discover us with greater ease, whether it's tourism sector, connecting in that way, getting our podcasts out if we're very much able to record them in that capacity. Maybe it's workshops that you're doing, right? So what are the different ways that we can put our footprint out there so that we're not on page 9? Because so often it's hard for the algorithms to pick us up. So that all of these different efforts being made to connect folks. I know there's also Nano that's doing some work to chat with folks in the community. So if they were to come through again, I know they were doing that during COVID, but they came through and were talking about how they wanted to know what are the different infrastructure needs out there. So when those organizations, when the funders come through and say, what is it that you want? I would really encourage, as an artist, as a volunteer, as a teacher, whatever it is that you do, and wearing all your hats, put up your paw and say, I'm delighted to talk to you. And those sessions also connect you with other folks to jam, to brainstorm about what we want to see going forward and what needs we have. There's some brilliant ideas that came out of those conversations, and you see repetition of them as well when you read those reports and say, oh, like 12 people are thinking the same thing. That's great. So yeah, saying yes to all the opportunities, looking into things that are happening on a provincial level, national level, because we're not alone, I think is one of the thoughts that I would really encourage, that there are other folks out there feeling similar things. And though they may not be specifically in my community, there are ways that their efforts can connect to mine.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's so many interesting things you've raised. I that's so great. I'm wondering that. So you're from Temiskaming Shores, right? That's
Yes.
okay. Great. Um, what have you noticed to be the different? What differences have you noticed since you were an emerging artist there growing up versus now? Have you seen like significant improvements, or do you think it's still really challenging for emerging? Like, is it possible right now, as it stands, for a younger emerging artist to grow and develop there, or is there still the necessity for them to go and increase their skills and get the experiences down south and then hopefully return? Or do you think we're getting to a point where they're able to stay in the community and develop?
I'd say right now it depends on the art form, and I really can't speak too much to music being how one trains as a musician. Uh, I did my training with music as a singer, but as a musician, that's a very different journey. Um, I'd say in terms of, I'll do a blanket statement from the beginning. I believe everyone should always leave their community at some point. Um, Come back, yes. Come back a million times, yes.
Mm.
But any artist that goes out there, you get to discover different things. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to change from the format that you started with, because it could be that you're brilliant. You're the next group of seven, and nobody does what you do. But going out there and finding different techniques that people might not be using in your region, whether it's a different way to strum the guitar, or a different paint stroke, or a different way to dance and move. And there are different players out there that if you remain only in one area, and I don't care if that's Northern Ontario or that's downtown Toronto, if you don't go outside your bubble in some capacity, how can you open yourself up as an artist to all the possibilities that exist for you? And there are so many different residency opportunities. It doesn't necessarily mean going away for 2 years and living in New Zealand. It could just be for a shorter period of time in with an artist that you is leading a workshop that you think is incredibly engaging.
Yeah.
So I'm all about education and taking those opportunities as they arrive. I think in terms of infrastructures that are in place, that it'd be a very, again, a lonely road if I were to stay in my community as an emerging artist in the Temiskaming area, at
Mm.
least. Growing up, there was, I would say, more of a thriving theater scene.
Oh.
There was even a community theater groups at the more adult level, and that's no longer the case.
Oh.
So sometimes things come in stages, they turn, they flow. Ottawa, when I was there, when I first came there, it was really exciting, and so many people moving and creating together. And then it got a little bit quiet for a while as you saw people move out of the area, just almost a mass exodus that everybody left at the same time. And some people stayed and really created things their own. But you have different players at that time. And you see everything move and shift in waves. And I would be delighted to go back to Ottawa. They're doing so many interesting things right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, the people that you might say, I know, I play with Joe, and Joe is my collaborator. As soon as they leave the area, it might be a very different dynamic. So how do you shift with that? And so as as an emerging artist, I would say trying to avoid falling into trenches, thinking that there is only one route. Thinking there's only one route is the enemy of creativity, because no story, no creation really winds up going one way all the time. You're like, I knew from the beginning it would end this way. And same with life's journeys. So thinking that you can come back, absolutely. And how do you influence the next folks coming through? Um, in terms of infrastructures, I mean, it's a very different world. There wasn't as much. We didn't have internet in our house
Yeah,
growing up, right? And internet has changed the the field completely in that you can take these classes online from the comfort of your own home. I could do a master class if I wanted to. I might not want to, but I could also attend little workshops by artists all around. So maybe the infrastructure is not there in my community, but I have different outlets for it. I will still plug that bricks and mortar people that are funded full time. I would definitely want, and I would encourage all the funders to remember that, and all the municipalities to remember the importance of those in-person sessions, because it is not a replacement. Digital is not a replacement of live in any capacity, but it is a complement, and it allows one to complement their their exploration, their creation, in many different ways.
yeah,
I would also say that for the film industry, that one is up and pumping in North
yes,
Bay, in Sudbury is exciting, and they're training so many folks coming in. There's some programs you can do in person and online right now. So, but that again, perhaps someone needs to open up their thought process of who are the folks I want to play with, because I know they've got a musical section as well that they support, as well as film. So that's interesting. And you wouldn't necessarily think that the film department there would also be interested in really encouraging the musicians up and coming, but that's an aspect of film as well, that they want to have, I would assume, have northern music in
yeah,
northern film shows, right? And so if you think outside those boxes as an emerging artist, saying, okay, how does my art form connect? Well, I'm a visual artist. Maybe there's paintings involved with some of the stories coming through. Can I do some artwork for them? For theater, can I break into film? Maybe I'm interested in that, or radio.
yeah,
So many paths.
for sure. I think so two things that I want to comment on is I think that's it's such an interesting perspective for the for what you were talking about with you think that emerging artists should leave their communities. I think that's you know I'm so focused on the idea of like how do we create infrastructure to like keep people here in the north and doing things and making art. But I think that's such a good perspective that people should probably leave and experience different things. So maybe the question is instead of like how do we keep them here, how do we attract them back after they get these new experiences, or how do we bring new people in? Because you're right, that's what's going to keep the arts alive in the region. That's what's going to keep bringing new, fresh experiences. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. That's great. That's a whole new perspective for me to think about.
I would
Um,
also plug on that thought process that there's the things that made you inspired as a kid in the area creating art, right? You're a kid first before you're ever an emerging artist.
yeah,
And so what activities were there for you to do on that very base level? Because if there's hockey, if there's soccer, and kids are doing that from age 3, and they continue to grow up with those opportunities, of course they're going to feel more cozy around that. It's a natural, it feels natural. Like I pick up my fork with my right hand because I've always picked up my fork with my right hand. If we're trying to get the kids interested in the arts at age when they're teenagers, when they're too cool for school, then it's a lot. It's a harder battle because you're going against what you would do on a normal day. Same as social norms. We put social norms in people's structures from a very young age, and it's harder for people to shift after a longer period of time. That's going to get into a different conversation. We won't run down that road, but ultimately, that notion of get them while they're young. So, how do you, as an adult, depending on where you are in your journey right now, if you are a teenager listening, like how can you influence someone who's 5, who's 9 or 10 in your community? Can you link up with a local municipality representative even on parade days, on community event days, to get the kids involved in your art form or a different art form that you're inspired in at a very young level? Because that's those structures need to be in place to even inspire your higher levels of government to think that this is a valid, important use of their money, to say that we should be funding summer classes in this form, bringing in people from outside the community to do specialized workshops, to create a theater in your downtown area, for people to see live shows, whether it's dance, music, theater, opera. If you don't get them when you're young, you are not going to get them later. And as artists, we are responsible for carrying that torch forward and thinking, how does my art relate on all different levels? Because I don't see myself necessarily as someone that wants to create theater specifically for children. My content is often very dark, but there are things that I can do that can speak to a young audience, or engage folks in senior homes with art forms, because also those who are retiring, they've got lots of cash, they would be willing to well, depends on the situation, is COVID right now, but folks at different stages of life have different finances that they might be willing to put forward to support different things in their area. But getting that community drive, that community excitement around different things is so important to create a base reason with your government, with your funders, for why there's a need. And we're integral parts of making those changes happen in our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anyone listening that has an interest in growing the arts or revitalizing the arts in their communities should be taking notes. This is all amazing, amazing advice, an amazing perspective. Um, I want to shift a little bit. I'm very interested just in hearing you talk and in hearing your unique voice. Um, what would be your dream project to see in let's specifically in a northern context? If you had all the funding in the world, or as much funding as you need, I just want to know, what would you create or facilitate?
Gosh, there are so many projects. I've got to create a single project. Well, I've got one that it's been sitting in the back of my mind since a very young age. And I realized as I wrote more and more grants, I'm like, that's a really big project. That's like saying, I would like to start with the Mona Lisa,
Yeah.
please, as my first project. But it's a piece about um, a trapper from 1940s period, and there was a huge manhunt that went for him, and ultimately there was that feeling um, of isolation happening at the same time. I don't want to give away who my character is. Somebody might get to my desired project before me, but ultimately it's a huge scale. It's got a lot of physical theater, absolutely. There's a lot of mountainous, almost acrobatics happening at the same time, playing with projections. How do the characters move and create a giant man chase sequence with either simply movement on stage? How does an assortment of like 8 different actors work together to create a chase scene, which you can do. It's absolutely fabulous and fun. And complementing that now with projections as well that allow you to take that dynamic to a different vantage point. I've always been incredibly inspired by Robert Lepage, who has groundbreaking explorations of theater and that idea of tilting space on its side, upside down, right side up. Beautiful imagery there. So definitely there's a lot of actors, huge scope, and stories based on historical characters. I find history fascinating, and those fringe characters most exciting. And that one happens up in the Yukon, so it does have that northern cold feeling, and in that specific case, very, very isolated, but impactful. How did the world change, and how did the search party efforts evolve
Mhm.
based on that one search? And yeah, that's the one I want to work on with my unlimited buns.
Very cool. I love the um, parallels to Robert Lepage. He's so inspirational in the way he approaches design and movement, and I adore his work. So that is super exciting to me. I hope I'm able to see that project one day. Yeah,
I hope it gets on stage one day.
absolutely. All right, so I'm noticing the time. I could keep talking about all this for another hour, but we should probably wrap up. Um, I wanted to end with giving you the opportunity to talk about anything you've got going on. If you have anything to plug, any organizations you're working with, I'm sure you've got a lot going on. So whatever you'd like to share with us, I'm floor is yours.
All right. An exciting project that I have been delighted to be part of is The Other Path. Is a podcast having mystical fairy type creatures combining with northern and Canadian locations, that the realm of the mystical meets with the present. So if you enjoy those hobbity type stories, or any of your Winx sagas, creatures of ogres and mermaids and all that fun stuff, but also like a taste of reality at the same time, there's The Other Path, and it's on Spotify, and it's on iTunes, and it's been all across Canada on CBC Radio, and they picked it up, and we're absolutely delighted by it. Five different, completely different stories, each one, and I have the pleasure of playing in two of those podcasts. And when you do listen, be sure to put your headphones on, because you'll be able to hear people shifting in space as if they're moving closer to you and further away. So that proximity with sound is integral to the piece, but you can only really explore that if you've got your headphones on. So be sure to check those out, completely free. And I think, yes. Living Tomogamy, connect with them if you are interested in getting your artwork known to folks, whatever the art form is. They're creating that database. They're excited to get everybody up and running and connected in there, so that all you artists out there, be sure to get that on, whether it's dance, theater, if you've got a workshop in your community, music, opera, all of it. They want to hear from you. Also, if you're planning to sell anything, maybe you do something on the side. They have, I know, a shop area there, but that is up and coming. Spark, I believe they'll be wandering back through people's communities soon enough. So that's a great group if you're looking for resources. Ontario Culture Days, they've got grants coming up. I think they've got one here at the end of the month. So I don't know when this airs, but if you do miss that window, there will be another one for an artist in residency opportunity coming up down the road as well. And they always have funds available to connect folks with their communities, to create art in their region. So if you have a project you're inspired to connect folks with, be sure to connect with them. I know Spark similarly has funds that allows infrastructure and tiny grants to happen in place in the community. So grants. And I think, February, yes, it's again grant writing time, for you artists out there. The Northern Artist Grant they've got, and they have a lovely team that's willing to chat with anybody that has questions who haven't written their own project. I'm working on my very solo OAC granted project, and was so delighted to receive support from them. So be sure to check out those opportunities. Play Smelters coming up in Sudbury. I'm sure they've got another year coming down the road, and they'll be looking for folks to connect with there. So there are so many opportunities out there. I hope folks will find 100 different ways that they can explore their art, because it's a wonderful process.
Thank you so much for sharing all that. So many exciting opportunities. We have so much going on. If you're listening and don't know how to get involved and get paid for your work as an emerging artist in the North, there's so many opportunities. It's you just gotta get out there and send send out your grant applications, and people will give you money to make art. It's amazing. It's so cool. I'm so glad to hear that there's so many things going on. So
And
many.
if you don't get that grant the first time, apply again. Apply again. It's the same as job applications.
Exactly.
It's you can't get all the fish, but you will have some fabulous fish that do come to your boat.
If you have a project that you're excited about and passionate about, stick with it, and someone is going to give you money for it. You just have to stick with your guns, and because I know sometimes it takes a while, but someone is going to recognize how special the work is for sure. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so happy to have had you on and to have had this chat. It's been great.
It's been such a pleasure, Garrett. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for coming again. And thank you everyone for watching, listening. Merci, miigwech. And stay tuned. We will be back with more stories from Northern artists directly to you wherever you're tuning in from. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, evening, night, whenever you're listening. Take care.